Hello, welcome to Uncommon Leadership. I'm Michael Hunter with Uncommon Teens. Today I'm talking with Jardena London. Jardena is an author, speaker, community leader, and business transformation consultant who helps businesses thrive by using a soulful lens. Welcome, Jardena.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here, Michael.
I'm so happy to have you here today. In your journey to seeing people as people and learning to leverage their unique gifts to best accomplish your goals, what has been your biggest struggle?
Oh, it's funny. It's ironic that you would phrase it that way because that is actually my biggest struggle right there, which is like not getting distracted by all of the system, right? I mean, I do love the system. Everybody loves it. Not everybody, but people who do improvement work tend to love the system, right? So not getting distracted by the complexities and the intricacies of the system and really pulling it back to focus on the interactions between people. And that's both a struggle and a strength for me. So it's a struggle because, I mean, listen, I started as a programmer, and the reason I wanted to be a programmer was because I didn't want to deal with people. Like I wanted to just sit in a cubicle and code. Like that is really what I wanted. And it just didn't accomplish the things I wanted to accomplish. So I had to look beyond like what's inside that screen. But it's been a strength for me because I feel like as a person who that doesn't come naturally for, I'm better able to explain it for people who it doesn't come naturally for.
I hear that all the time. The reason I got into software was so I wouldn't have to deal with emotions.
Well, there's emotions in software. And then what do those people say that they then couldn't avoid it, which is what I found out.
Yeah, it always shows up in some way.
It shows up. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's my struggle, but also it's a good struggle.
And what you said about it being a struggle and a strength, I find is often also the case that what we are best at is what comes hardest for us because um, actually, I don't know why.
Well, it's sort of like the caterpillar coming out of the cocoon, right? Like there's transformation in a struggle, right? Either it's a shaping process versus something that's too easy and maybe there's nothing really left behind. There's nothing learned.
Great. I definitely find for myself that I learn the most when I fail, because when I succeed, I don't know what I did right.
Right. You don't know what you did right. So those people who are naturally good at with people skills, how could they explain it? They have no idea what they did to do that. It's too natural, or that's good for them that it's natural, but you can't really teach anyone.
How do you help people on both ends of that spectrum of I'm just great with people and I don't know why, and I am not great with people and I don't know how to change it? How do you help both of them get better?
So let's start with the people who are already good with people. The people who are good with people, and again, a wonderful skill which I envy. But what they may not be able to do is, and boy, I hate the word scale, but scale that into a system. Like so they have to be there because they're the one with the charisma, they're the one who is compelling, but when they're not there, it doesn't work. So the learning there is like, how do I systematize the things that I'm doing, and not just systematize being charming, but being able to connect people, right? So if I have to be in the room in order to connect everybody, it doesn't really scale because I have to be in the room, but there's other ways to connect people that doesn't require charisma. So I think that's the learning for folks who are good with people, like how to extend that beyond yourself. Um, in terms of the people who aren't good with people, there's a lot of inner work there. And I think everyone can do inner work, even if you're good with people. But there's some inner work there to understand how to connect with people and why, and what is authentic for you. So as I'm an introvert, so as an introvert, and I just said person who wasn't always good with people, I really dug deep into what what does connect me with people, what is my authentic self. So peeling back all of that armor of not wanting to be with people allowed me to connect in ways that was more fulfilling. So I actually found that the way to do that not the way that that other person at the other end of the spectrum that you just described. I'm not going to do it that same way, but I'm going to do it my way.
How are you finding your way?
A lot of introspection, which is what those of us who are introverts are good at, but understanding what drives me, like what my authentic self is, but then also understanding it's confusing at first because you might think that some of your armor that you have that's protecting you is your authentic self. So trying to distinguish between like what's inside and what's protecting and peel back those layers that are protecting you. I always tell the story about when I first learned the word armor, which Brene Brown uses a lot. I heard it from a friend of mine, and I was like, wow, armor. I didn't even know that was a thing. And she said to me, oh, it's a thing, honey, and you have a ton of it. So I was like, oh, okay. Thank you for that insight. But then I went through the process of peeling it back.
And that can be so confusing because some of that armor we put on ourselves, some of it has been placed on us by other people, not meaning it to be armor or
Mhm.
meaning it to be armor in a well meaning way. And some of that armor resonates or dovetails in with who we are. And
That's
so
work.
distinguishing all these fine details of, well, this came from someone else, and it's this part of it is actually like who I am, and maybe this is why I've held on to it for so long,
Hmm.
can be really challenging.
It's so challenging and also so fulfilling that it, for a little while for me, became addictive to want to just, like people get addicted to self-help. And that's why, because every time you get some new self-awareness, then there's something so beautiful on the other side that it's like, I want more of that. But then you have to really get on with your life at some point. But always be open to learning new things about yourself. Like I told you, that was a lot of self-awareness for me to learn that I had a ton of armor. So I think the interesting thing here, though, is when we talk about organizations and leadership, is so as a leader, of course, you want to be peeling back your armor and, you know, not doing things that are ego driven so that your people who are, I guess if we say leaders, the opposite of that is followers, right? So that your followers or people that you're working with are not following your ego driven direction, your ego driven leadership. But then the super interesting thing to me is, so what armor do organizations have? Or what armor do teams have that they've built collectively? Right? I mean, it's one thing to go through and remove your armor as an individual, but to remove a corporation's armor is an interesting process.
How do you bring this up with teams and companies?
Sure. So this is one of those things. I mean, it's just like it is with an individual, right? It's a peeling back of what is no longer serving you here. Is it a process? Is it a culture? Is it a belief that is, a lot of times it's culture, right? So for example, you might find some big corporations that are very risk averse because at some point in the company's history, they got bitten or they were in a different regulatory environment that has changed. And now they haven't shifted that, the culture of having to have everything be perfect or, so risk averse to change with the changing environment. So it's just looking at and even having the conversations about, as a leader, what elements of our culture are no longer serving us? What elements of our process are no longer serving us?
I like that question because it brings in all of the introspection without saying, okay, now we're going to do some squishy people, introspective, scary, look inside ourselves stuff that isn't necessarily obvious to many people of why that's useful in a work context.
So I think there's a lot of, I don't know, red herrings or false, I don't know, practices in corporations. So that's one of them. So one of the false beliefs in organizations is that if we can fix every individual, or change every individual, even in a specific way, right? Not generically, but if we said we need each individual to be able to remove their armor, and then that's going to make us a less armored company. Well, no, that math does not work. Or another one that was popular 2 years ago was like, we need to make each person resilient so that we can have resilient organization. And that is not the math for that, right? Actually, you can have a bunch of armored people in a resilient organization, or vice versa, right?
That's kind of like saying, if we can make each ingredient in my pie a little more sweet, then the pie is going to be so much more sweet and better. Just so not the case.
Wait, is that not the case with pie? Actually, I don't know.
Well, I'm trying to imagine what like sweet flour or sweet cinnamon, what that would do to the pie. I don't think it would end up being a tasty pie.
It wouldn't be tasty, that's for sure. It'd be too sweet, maybe. Yeah. So exactly. So this whole belief that we can it's the Taylorism, right? Like we can fix each tiny part and the sum of that will be, a better whole. And it just doesn't work that way.
And each person may not want to come along on that journey and may not need to come along on the journey, or may not want to come along as far as you or someone else is.
Right. And so when we think about something like, let's take resiliency, because that was so popular recently, and still is, I guess. But so creating a resilient company has nothing to do with creating resilient individuals, first of all. But second of all, creating conditions for individuals to be able to be resilient, that there maybe is value to that, but it still doesn't add up to a resilient company. But okay, but there might be value. But it is creating conditions to allow that rather than to like go and impose resiliency on each individual.
Yes. That difference between allowing, encouraging, and inflicting.
Inflicting that's the word. That's a good word, right? So a lot of what I think about when I say businesses thrive when we use a soulful lens is looking at the business, the process, whatever it is, through this lens of like, well, how can we be more soulful, but also successful, not just touchy-feely. And that is about creating those conditions. Like when you look through a soulful lens, it tends to always result in creating conditions and not an imposing, inflicting process framework. So I think I said before, there's a lot of false beliefs out there. And one of them is we can transform our business through a framework or through a process methodology. And that's just not, I mean, we've seen it for years, right? That's just not how it works.
The transformation that will take place is not automatically the transformation that framework promises.
Well, isn't that the truth? Right.
The company's going to change in some way, but it's unlikely to be the way that the people driving the transformation desire if it's entirely focused on implementing that process.
Exactly.
Missing out all the squishy people stuff that process runs into and squishes around.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good point.
So how can we as leaders start to move in these directions of bringing more of ourselves into our work, encouraging our team to do this without requiring that everyone comes along with us, and while still honoring those who don't want to come on the journey with us?
Right. Well, that's a loaded, complex question there. So let's see if we can break it down. So allowing for, I think the biggest thing there in your question about how can we actually allow people to bring themselves and be themselves, I think that the thing there is about being in service to really the business. And I know people always say business is made up of people. It is. And we talked about individuals and that trap, but being of service to the actual business. and not to my agenda, my career, your agenda, your career. It's not about, people always ask me, like, well, how can I make this group happy and this group happy? I'm like, you need to make the company happy. That's who you need to make happy. And so if some folks don't want to be along on the journey of that, your company or your organization, maybe this isn't the place for them. Like that's a self-selection thing there. But I think once you're clear on what the company's purpose is, people can make that decision. Now, creating a space where everyone can be themselves is different. Like if you're sort of against what the company's mission is, really don't work there. But creating a space for people to bring them their full selves, I think is about, I don't think it needs to be about placating everybody. What I think it is about is creating conditions where people can thrive and flourish. So what I mean by that, it sounds very abstract, but it's really not, is looking at where your processes and practices and structures are preventing that from happening, right? It's like removing obstacles is the way. So when I talk about soulful lens, what's the opposite? The opposite of that is soul crushing lens, right? So if I look at everyone, right? So that resonates. People, I say soulful, people say, what does that mean? I go, do you know what soul crushing means? It's the opposite of that. So if you look at like what do we have in place that's most soul crushing here? Well, it's our yearly budgeting process. Okay, let's start there. How can we not crush people with that and still have have thriving financials?
Do you have an example of a specific example of that in particular, how that worked?
I have, that's my bonus download for your listeners.
Oh,
And
great.
also, funny you should ask. But yeah, so if you look at the 5 steps to soul, which I don't have in front of me here, but I'm not going to go through this because I don't have it in front of me. I should though. If you think about that, like you take yourself through that process, what is the original soulful purpose of why we put a funding and budgeting process in place in the first place? It wasn't to torture people. It was so that we can make the best investments of our time and energy in this company to keep this company alive so that we can all keep working here, right? I mean, that is the soulful purpose of budgeting. And then you sort of go through and ask yourself, well, what makes it soul crushing? Well, it makes it soul crushing because I have to be pitted against my peers and because it takes forever and it's 1,000 meetings and it's taking me away from the work that's helping the company thrive. Like there's a lot of things that you could talk about that are soul crushing. But then you move into, you sort of unpack that, like, how did we get here? And then you move into, well, what would it take to make it soulful? Right? It's not to say we're not going to do the work. We're going to still do the work because people think, what if it I think the false dichotomy is it's a choice between either soulfulness and financial viability. It's not. So what would make it soulful and also financially viable? Well, maybe we can shorten the process. Maybe we can have collaboration instead of competition for funding, like different things like that. And then you take that forward and say, well, okay, so now what would it take to alter this process? We don't have to revamp it, but can we tweak it to make it more soulful? So that's kind of the process that you can go through with funding in particular, which is a big one. Performance management, status meetings, like there's a lot of soul crushing things that happen.
And this brings us back to what we were talking about at the beginning, that it all comes down to what is the best way to achieve the company's goals. And that's almost always not be soul crushing, but be soul uplifting.
So I love that. Thank you for bringing me back to that. So if you think about what we were talking about, like your yearly budgeting process, or even whatever your frequency is, by having to fight my peers for budget, I am not looking at what's in the best interest of the company, right? I'm looking at what's in the best interest of my team. But I need to be able to do that in a way that's like not a zero-sum game with my peers. And there are leaders out there, uncommon leaders, who say the stuff my team works on is not the best thing for us to put our energy into this year. So I'm going to give, and I've seen this happen. It was amazing. I'm going to give my funding to the group that is working on the most strategic thing. And we're going to go over there and help them.
It's amazing.
Yeah, there was sort of I was in a room once where that happened, and there was just sort of like silence for a minute, like no one could believe it.
I feel happy knowing that we have people in business like this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
This is what I help my clients do. And I do this because the more I can help the people around me and the people building the world that we're going into be happy, and the more that that happiness infuses everything that they're building, and eventually through people and their people and their people and their people, we get out to the customers who are taking the products that we're taking, and we're helping them be happy. And so eventually, by me helping one leader be more happy and more of themselves into everything that they do, into their work, then the whole world gets better.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Michael. I just want to talk. I want to talk for a second about the word soulful, because I noticed you use the word happy. And of course, when I was first starting in this work, I went around with like, is it joyful? Is it happy? Is it soulful? Um, I chose the word soulful because it's not always happy. I mean, things happen in life that are not happy. Pets die, people die, like things happen. And what I would like is a work environment that allows for that. And I say it's soulfulness because it's all emotions that are welcome, right? So, not like happiness is, of course, wonderful, but also if I'm sad about something, I'd like to allow for that too, because that's real.
Right. Yes. Thank you for that reminder that it's in an encouraging and encompassing environment, not a this is the one way that we must all be.
Right, right. Because then you end up with the false happiness.
Right.
No. But happiness, we can have a bigger percentage. That would be wonderful. I think frustration is one of the killers of, that's an emotion that maybe we don't want to welcome because, or as much, because that's like when you have processes that are frustrating people, and that's so common, that's a soul crusher.
I like this the soul crushing, soulful this spectrum. Because as you said, everyone understands what soul crushing feels like. And I don't know anyone who truly wants more soul crushing. And so that's something that is probably pretty easy to get agreement on in even the most antagonistic environments of would we like things to be at least a little less soul crushing around here? Great. And then all the questions that you were mentioning before on how to make that happen.
Oh, thank you. That's actually very helpful for me in my messaging, that is a resonant point.
What else should I ask you today, Jardina?
Oh, I think you asked me so many. We've had such good discussion. I think I don't know, how do I phrase this in a form of a question? Um, can I just give it as a sentence?
Sure.
The one thing that we sort of alluded to, but didn't hit head on, that I just want to make sure I mention, is as a transformational leader, I do like to look through the three lenses: the me, the we, and the system. So we talked in the beginning about the introspection of like me as a leader. And then we talked about like how to extend it to the system. But in between there's the we, like how do we connect people with each other, right? And create that force of that collective force. So I don't know if that's not a question, Michael. Is there a question in there?
Is there a simple way that you found tends to work to help start forging that connection?
A simple way. Well, there's lots of kind of standard ways out there where I think lots of icebreaker and tons of team forming activities. The one I like to do, that I feel like sort of it pulls some stuff to the surface, is when you do a simple role and responsibility, we just doing this with a client yesterday, activity where it's, what do you need from me? Well, what can I offer? So what are the things I'm offering to you? I might do a lot of work inside my box here, but the edges of my box, the boundaries basically, where you can actually, like, I think like an API, right? So where you can actually get things from me, here's the things I'm offering. And what do I need from all of you? Right. And having that exercise where we all talk about just everyone wants to talk about what they're doing. We don't care about what you're doing. We trust that you're working hard, but what are you putting out to the group, and what do you need as intake from the group? And then that is where it leads to a lot of good bonding opportunities, because then you find out, well, here's what I need from you. And it's like, well, I'm not giving you that. I have no intention of giving you that. Right. So that when you have the friction, and maybe that's the answer to your question, creating opportunities for conflict, to work through conflict, is where teams bond, right? But avoiding conflict, then you have these teams that are sort of always surface. But if you can create those opportunities to like surface the disagreement, that's where the bonding really happens.
If I don't know where else to start with the conflict and help that conflict arise in a productive fashion, that we can get into the nitty gritty of where that's coming from and how we can usefully resolve that.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's the meat of it. Of course, if you probably want something to start with something a little lighter, but yes, that I used to do a great exercise on conflict where I did it at a workshop once, and then I started to use it, but just have people stand in a line, like, or you could do it on Mural too, if you're remote, but like put yourself on this continuum between I love conflict and I hate conflict. And it's pretty eye-opening if you do that with a team, that like those people who you're always fighting with might be the ones who love conflict, right? Which is me, by the way, that I'm at that end. But not understand it opened up some of my team members' eyes as to why I like conflict, and that I wasn't just doing it to be a jerk. I'm actually interested in the details of why we disagree, and like I want to go there. And they kind of saw that as like a negative thing, and I saw it as a fun thing.
Right. Because for you, it's, oh, this is how I understand where you and I differ and where I can learn, where other people might have been seeing it as, this is how he make things not work.
Well, they saw it as me not trusting them, or like they thought I should just trust them and not ask questions. And right, that they saw it like as a credibility threat. And I just saw it as interesting. So that's like when you get into the deep stuff. For the lighter stuff in terms of connecting teams, though, I will just share like improv. I've done whole workshops on improv, because improv techniques bring a couple of interesting things besides fun, right? Fun is always good, but they help the team get highly attuned to each other, because you can't do improv, and like simple improv, like throwing imaginary ball around. But I can't throw an imaginary ball to you and have you catch it if we are not like completely attuned to each other. So it just gets them used to being attuned to each other, sort of moving together, like all of that stuff gets people really jiving. So not all improv, you have to pick the right activity that for the group that does those, that has those benefits, but that's a really fun thing to do before you get into the deep stuff like conflict.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
We touched a little bit on your gift for our listeners, our audience today, your 5 steps to soul. Is there anything more you'd like to say about that?
Yeah, so you'll put the link in the
Have the link in the show notes.
so,
Yep.
yeah, so I kind of brushed through it today on this podcast, but that gives you more details of those 5 steps to turning a soul crushing process into a soul fulfilling, I guess, process. So yeah, go check that out. That's just like a little short guide to the 5 steps to applying soul. The book to Transformational Leadership, which is called Cultivating Leadership, Cultivating Transformations. Can you help me edit that? Cultivating Transformations, which is a leader's guide to connecting that soulful and practical, which is all, what it's all about. And I think that that's another message I'll leave you with which is I said, businesses thrive when they use a soulful lens, not two separate things. Like for too long, we've had like HR doing soulful team building things here, and then finance doing financials over here. And it's not different.
Right. It's all one holistic piece.
Isn't it? Well,
It really is.
yeah.
What is the best way for our audience to connect with you if they'd like to learn more about connecting that soulful and practical, or any of the other things we talked about
Yeah.
today?
So you can find me on I guess LinkedIn is probably the best way because I post lots of content there. I have a few websites that I know you'll put in the link, which I have tons of blogs and free resources and things there for you, besides the free download. But I also have, if you are a transformational leader, and I use that term very broadly. So if you identify with the term transformational leader in any way, doesn't have to be in your title, we do have the transformational leadership community that's kicked off. So you can come in there and you can interact with other transformational leaders. We have live sessions on Wednesdays. I just came from there, where we can go through a lot of the topics that are relevant to success as a transformational leader.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I was nice to be here.
What would you like to leave our audience with today, Jardena?
I think the biggest thing that I want to leave folks with is what I've been saying. The businesses thrive when you use a soulful lens. So just look for opportunities to bring a little soulfulness into the work you do. Just a little bit, just a little seed of soul. That's all you need.
That sounds like a song title.
Well, we'll have to
Just a
find someone
seed
else.
of soul.
Yes, you'll find someone else to sing that one, but I can write the lyrics maybe.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Jardena, for being with us today.
It was a pleasure.
And thank you, audience, for being with us today. And please let Jardena and I know, how do you bring a little more soul into your workplace and your life today? We want to know. Thanks so much and have a great day. Thanks for joining us on Uncommon Leadership today. If you found these stories interesting, inspiring, and illuminating, sign up for my newsletter. Hop over to uncommonteams.com and use the form at the top of every page. You'll be the first to know about every new episode of Uncommon Leadership. You'll also discover how you can build uncommon teams. If you'd like to chat about doing that yourself, email me, michael@uncommonteams.com, or use the contact form on my website. Thanks so much.